Hi, welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Thank you so much for continuing to watch here on YouTube. I hope you're having a beautiful day. Today I want to show you how to make a skeleton knotted tree over the face of a cabochon. Now, this is beautiful as a pendant but works equally well. You can do this, size it up on a massive slab of agate for instance. Looks amazing as a wall decor. So I'm working today with labradorite. I'm also using 1mm or 18 gauge wire plus 0.4mm 26 gauge wire in a raw copper. Labradorite is one of my favourite gemstones of all time, and it's not difficult to see why. If you join me down at the board, we'll chat a little bit more about some of the materials that we'll need. So here's a closer look at the piece in question. Beautiful sunset labradorite, and we've got a skeleton tree here. So you've got the roots coming up and the branches at the top, and then you've got a couple of little knots in the centre, which is a decal I've been adding to my trees over the past couple of years, and lots of people seem to be stumped and mystified by. It's super easy. So I'm going to show you this in several stages. First of all, I'm just going to flip the design over so you can see the back. It's going to use a basic frame at the rear. Now this is a very secure housing, and we're going to start at the bottom by attaching the roots of our trees, which then turn to the trunk and then become the branches and secure at the top. But to begin with, we're going to work with 1mm 18 gauge wire to create a secure backing and bail for the pendant in question. So 1mm gauge, I'm just going to give that a bit of a warm through. There's the labradorite I'm going to work with today. Now, just for your reference, the piece that I've got here uses just 10 strands of wire, which is why it's a skeleton tree. If you want to up the game slightly, you can obviously add slightly more wires, give it a bit more substance, and even add foliage at the top. It's entirely up to you, but this is a single-faced pendant, and I will show you a little bit later on in the year how to create a double-faced tree pendant. So the first thing that we're going to do, as I say, is warm our frame wire, and then I'm going to find my ring mandrel. I'm going to find a position that I think will work. Centre of my approximately 12 inches, 300mm of wire. I'm just going to put a circle on one end, making sure that I remember whereabouts on the mandrel I've got that form from. So I'm just going to mark this slightly with my thumb. And I'm going to pop that on the back. So I think that's a really good size. It's a good 4 or 5mm inside the outer margin of my cabochon in question. So we're going to then come back to where we were a moment ago, slide the piece onto the mandrel, move it up the wire and cross over to create an oval form. Now you can get tools that assist you with this job, but what I'm doing is showing you the basic way. You could even use a marker pen if you wanted to. So I'm just going to make that slightly smaller, draw those two wires a little bit further down. And once I'm happy with the frame size sitting inside the back of my cabochon, you can reform that if you need to. I'm just going to pop that to one side and then create some uprights at the 11 and 1 o'clock position. So it's always easier for me to just flip the design over because I'm right dominant. So I do sort of 1 o'clock and 1 o'clock, but technically it's 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock. So we're just going to take a moment to get those bends nice and firm and make sure that we are indeed happy that that will securely house the piece in question once we've developed the tree design around it. So the next thing that we would need to do is to use some 0.4 or 26 gauge wire off the reel ideally to create a weave at the top which we can then turn into, in this instance, an oversized but super simple bail. So what I would do is start on one side and just wind on. I think I'm going to go for a 6 coil weave. So I've got 3 or 4 on there, and then I'll just take that tail all the way around until I've got a nice neat coil. So I think that's only 5, so we'll give that another turn in a second. If you're gentle with your wire, you can actually turn it on the frame like so. So once I've got my 6 in position, I'm going to draw that all the way down to the base of the neck of the design where that bail will come away. The wires come over the top, no, it's coming from underneath, beg pardon, on the left hand side. So that means it needs to come up the middle, over the top of the right hand wire, and grip that at the appropriate distance apart. You can use a ring clamp if you like, but once you get going, it really does sit quite neatly after a few turns. So we said we would do 6, that's 5 and 6. Going to give that a little squeeze to make that neat and tidy, and then move it down so that those two sit opposite one another. The wire has come underneath, so it needs to come up the centre and across to the other side, where you would continue to wrap 6 times and so on and so forth until you've finished as much as you really want. So for a bale of this size, that would probably equate to around about 1 3/4 to 2 inches of back and forth basket weave. So I'm just going to trim this away because you don't need to see me repeat that over and over again. Just repeat until you've got as much as you think you'll need to generate a lovely bale for your design. The next thing you will need to do is to decide how many individual strands of wire you want to create on your tree. So for this tree, we've got 10 strands of wire, which means it's fairly skeletal. If you want that to be a little bit more bushy or to have a thicker trunk, then you need to up the number of wires you're adding now. Each of these is approximately 6 inches in length, which is far more than we need. And that's because it gives us the opportunity later to add some little dimensions that we might not have thought of to begin with. You can even add foliage if you want to. So what we would do is lay our wires over the framework and then wrap around. Now I like to go for a good 4 coils for a design like this, and there is strength in repetition. So by the time you have added on, and all I'm doing, as I say, is I'm just coiling that wire around the framework, taking care not to deform the shape of the frame, and then just neatening up those coils when we get there. So what you will end up with is a beast like this. Let me just pop this one out of the way for a second. So for the demonstration, I've chosen to show you the difference. This is a 10 wire tree of life, a skeleton tree. This one has 15 wires, so it's going to look a little bit more bushy. And the next step of the equation is to start bringing these together to create a nice strong hold at the base of our cabochon on the back. So I'd say 2 or 3 at a time. Now because we've got 15 wires in total, it kind of makes sense to me to bring 3 wires together at a time. Now you don't have to, because trees don't tend to be overly symmetrical, and all I'm doing is very gently taking 3 wires at a time and just twisting them, not overly strongly, quite loosely together, leaving a little bit of space so that you don't unravel those coils on the frame. So giving that a bit of a twist. You may need to twist it further when you pop your cabochon in place, you will see. So I'm just going to do these last couple of pieces here. What I tend to do, get them all 3 straight in a line to begin with, and then the action is rather akin to turning a key. Some people have been known to do this with a drill bit. It doesn't work for me. I like to do this part by hand. Just going to separate those out a little bit. Sorry about the noises of the wires on the work surface. That's just the way it is, I'm afraid. So I'm just going to turn those like a key until I get the heavier root systems to support the base of that cabochon from the rear to the front of the design. So as I say, I just like to get those lined up to begin with. You don't have to. Can be quite organic, and I'm just going to pinch down there where it joins onto the frame so that I have that moment of separateness where the roots come away from the frame itself. Now you can, if you wish, twist these a little bit tighter with your pliers. If you are going to do this, you need to be very delicate, especially at the ends of those joins, because what can happen is if you put just a little bit too much pressure on wire that's already slightly stressed, and it will snap. If that happens, don't overly worry, as long as you've got plenty left to bring around. So we're just going to take a moment now. We're just going to take a moment to take stock of how our roots are going to look as they come from the rear of the cabochon around to the front. So the piece that I've got here is a much wider cabochon than in my hand. The one on the desk is wider but shorter. So they'll look quite different, albeit the exact same techniques are involved. So we'll pop back down to the desk now and carry on. So there's our reference piece. That again is the 10 wire and this is the 15 wire. So I'm going to pop my cabochon over the surface. I quite like how that's starting to look already. Now what you might notice with this labradorite is it's quite green at the top. There's an element of blue here and then there's a very dark zone which you'll often get in labradorite. So I'm choosing to orient my gemstone in this fashion. What I do want to do is ensure that my cabochon sits completely centrally on that section which will become later on our bail. So I'm just going to push down on that for a moment, lift the whole design up and make sure that things are centralised on the rear. So we've got this upside down and what I'm going to do is just push that onto the surface of the back of the cabochon and start folding my twisted root sections so that they begin to bend around the gemstone. And in that way I know that I'm working centralised when I come back to the front. Now it is all going to get a little bit floopily at this stage, but what we're going to start doing is bringing those pieces together. So we're face up again, and what I'm going to do is grasp two of those sections to bring them together slightly. And you will end up with fistfuls of the wrong bits of wire for a moment there, but it all comes good and will work out. So I've gone for 2 from the lower left. I might go for 2 from the lower right now, just drawing them gently together so that they can start to come through as tree roots. If they get a little bit knotted at the top, you can just ease those through like it's a child's hair. Gently is the key. So I've got a couple of root systems beginning to form, and then over on this side I might need to twist this single batch of 3 a little bit more before it all comes together to form the base of that tree. So you would need to take stock to make sure you've not pushed anything out of position at the base and that your gemstone is still oriented exactly how you want it to be. So if you were to remove your cabochon and start twisting the wires, what can happen is that it tightens up and you then can't get your cab back into position. So it's worth just making this tricky moment work for you. So I'm just going to twist a little bit more before I bring all 15 of those together. Like so. Now I'm not going to do anything about this right now, just going to very, very gently ease that apart. Like so, just to make sure that we're not giving ourselves any future problems. So there's a bit of a knot there, but we'll just take that away. So what I'm looking to do, I'm just going to remove the cab to show you. We've created a basket out of roots at the bottom there. Pop the cab back into position. Now because we individually stranded around the back and the base of our piece like so, what it means is we can be a little bit flexible. We can move those around. If you double strand them, it kind of controls where they sit on the piece and you might struggle with the flexibility to move things around. So flipping back to the surface again, what we're going to do is start bringing all of those 15 strands together as neatly as possible. So that means just brushing through a little bit to keep that as neat as possible. Now what I like to do, as soon as we've got all of our threads coming together, making sure that you're not tightening up too much at the base here, I'm going to press down ever so slightly and then I'm going to come in with my pliers and give a really good tightening twist right down here at the base of our tree trunk, just to make sure that that all sits super neatly. Now it doesn't matter if it goes from side to side because trees often do that. The next stage I'm going to show you is how to generate one of those little knots in the trunk, and I'm just going to show you once on this design. There are several on this piece here. So what we're going to do is lift away 2 or 3 individual strands of the lighter gauge copper that are near the top of your bundle. So I've got 3 or 4 here, and I'm just going to pull them very gently up and away from the rest of the bundle. Can you see there? Then what I'm going to do is twist a couple of times by hand to continue that trunk. And then, this is for the knot, what we're going to do is smooth these 3 extra wires. So what we can do actually is just move the cab for a second. Probably the last time we'll be able to do that. What we're going to do is just pull those away. If it is a little bit kinked, you need to make sure that they are smooth. So I'm just going to very, very gently bring those into true, make sure that I'm happy with them. and that you get 3 or 4 strands, however many you've chosen, side by side. I'm going to lay them between my thumb and forefinger and just draw that all the way around, all the while keeping those side by side, so it's like a racetrack. And then we're going to do a circle and just tighten that slightly to bring that back up to nestle in with the rest of our wires. Now, depending on which way you've been twisting your wires will depend on where you need to take the tails. So I've taken them back underneath, and I'm now going to just give that a little bit of a twist whilst holding the knot over the surface to get everything to continue on its merry, merry way. So there's your knot in your skeleton tree. I'm going to pop the cabochon back into position and make sure that I'm happy with how things are progressing. So we're coming quite a long way up our Tree of Life design, so you might not be ready to start your branches coming out to either side. So what you can do, just to slow your progress down, is add some dimensions. So I'm just going to make this a very bendy, witchy tree and put a little bit of a diversion in that trunk as it grows upwards towards the light. I'm really quite happy with that. So what we would do is then start taking 2 or 3 or more if you like. This is obviously quite a bushy tree, this one. There's many, many more strands than there are on my example. You take 2 or 3 strands away at a time, preferably from similar parts of the bundle of wire that you're working with. I might just take a moment just to make sure that I'm happy with how these are coming away. Separate them out, and then you can start twisting off and creating branches that come away to the side. So again, pressing down with my non-dominant hand just to make sure that everything stays in true, I've started to create a branch coming over to the side. Now what you can do at this stage, if you want to add blossoms, is add them in now before you finish and disappear around the back of your Tree of Life design. Or you can continue and just have naked branches. So I'm just going to have naked branches on this one. Take those all the way around the back. And what you will do is finish off individually, 1 strand at a time. So we've got loads to work with there. And all you will do is thread them in exactly the same fashion as you did at the beginning. So 3 or 4 times is sufficient around that framework at the back. So you will need to take your time at this stage, and I'm just going to lay each of those bundles of copper over the front of the surface of our cabochon design, just to show you where those would look aesthetically pleasing, and I'm going to then do 1 or 2 examples of securing the whole piece together. So coming back to the front of the piece, what you can do once you've decided that your tree is going to come off at a jaunty angle is continue winding each of those sections, and then every now and again bring a branch away from the main segment. And you can go for as many or as few as you want. It is completely your tree and in your control. You don't have to have any kind of symmetry to it, or you can indeed be completely symmetrical and make a beautiful design. It is entirely up to you. So it's just a case of separating out the different parts of the tree as you go. So I'm just going to twist the main branch and then leave the bundles for the time being. So I've got a piece that's come around by itself. It doesn't look overly attractive, so I'm just going to unwind that before I continue. And then very, very gently put a little bit of pressure in the tree trunk so that we get that continuance of form. So what I think I would probably do is just separate these away here, like so. And again, you can be quite creative with how bendy your tree is. You can even put little white beads on the front if you want to replicate a captured moon in a skeleton tree. But if we say that this is where we wanted to get to, we would take these around the back, remembering to keep our cabochon centrally against the framework that we've created to have a bail. And then 1 wire at a time over the top, pinching into position, and then just wrapping around. So you can just lift that frame ever so slightly, pop the wire underneath like so, and then draw it around. Once you've got the first wire through, it's actually much easier. You do need to get a little bit of tension, and if you do misform the frame, it's no great shakes because this is a one-sided pendant. So I would go for 3 or 4 wraps each time and then tighten those up. Now I'll just show you how to finish this one, and then we'll talk about some pitfalls and some things to avoid once I've finished this one, because you don't really want to see me do this 15 times. When you get to your last coil that you're going to create, however many you choose, I would say a minimum of 3 or 4 is necessary. What you're going to do is cut with about 1.5 millimeters to spare, and then just use fine tipped chain nose pliers to just tuck that away so that that cut end sits inside the framework. So back to the front of the design, what you will need to do is make sure that this is tight. There are many ways that you can post edit. So this is a little bit loose actually. What you can do is just lift the frame away slightly and continue to coil that around. If that doesn't work for you, then you can add some other dimensions into the tree just to bring that nice and tight for you. You'll need to do that 15 times to make sure that all of these sit together and that you end up with the tree design that you like. So there's your knotted skeleton tree. What I do need to show you is just how to make that bail finish. So I'm going to just tuck these wires around and out of the way for a second, because I'll probably finish this off later so that it can be used or gifted. Making sure that I'm happy with how the tree sits on the framework, and making sure that my framework comes away centrally so that it's aesthetically pleasing. So I'm going to come up about 1/4 of an inch, I suppose. I'm going to use some flat pliers now. There's my torch, sorry about that. I'm just going to use some flat pliers to bring this forwards about 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch from the top of that cabochon. And I'm then going to use a round form, I can't find my ring mandrel right now, just to create a circular form for that lovely bail for us. So this is quite an oversized bail. It's not quite as large as the one on my first tree. And what I might do is actually just bring the cabochon out for now, because it'll be much easier for me to show you if that's not in the way. I'm just going to pull the tree out of the way. What I can do is just remove that from the framework. Obviously you won't be doing that. You will want to keep your tree intact. But this will enable me to show you how to finish that bail. Now sometimes it's easier in fact to make the bail first and then pop the tree on, but this is easy enough to show you. So we've got a length of woven neck coming away from the tree itself, and that gives us enough space for the cabochon to fit inside. So you'd think that that would be too long a neck, but once the cabochon is in position, you've actually just got a little bit of space at the top. And what we're going to do is take one length of wire in one direction and one in the other. Very, very simple. This is my simplest bail that I use. What I'm going to do is make sure that that circle is closed as possible. And I'm going to take that all the way around in the one direction as tightly as possible. Now what I need to make sure right now is that my cab still fits in, and yes it does, so that's happy days. And then I'm going to take the other wire over the top all the way around in the opposite direction, and then you've got these lovely tails which you can use to create coils to cover your wire ends if you so desire. So what I will do is I'll finish the much heavier 15 strand Tree of Life over cabochon for you to see, and I'll pop a photograph up at the end of the video. But that's my tutorial for a knotted skeleton tree over the surface of a cabochon, in this case beautiful labradorite. So your materials 1mm or 18 gauge, 0.4mm or 26 gauge. I do hope to see you again on the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Thank you so much for continuing to watch. Bye for now.